Premium terms came into existence effectively December 2011. But that was almost at the dying days of the year. So people tend to remember it because it came as part of the process of the Occupy Nigeria, so to say. So people tend to date it to January 2012, but actually it came through the test process in November, but effectively December. That was it. Well, that's a good question. The journey has been pretty good, I will say. You have to put it against the background of the mission. The mission, when we started out, was first to try to do a truly investigative newspaper in Nigeria that is domiciled inside Nigeria. To do it also not in the sense of an aggregation, to do it with a full complement of a newsroom, and then to try to provide effective professionalism as much as possible. I would say this because a number of things were happening within the Nigerian, or in fact global media ecosystem. The first, of course, was that the NCC, that's the Communications Commission, had just brought out the first interesting, to our own mind, communication audit after the SIM registration exercise, suggesting at that point that at least about 100 million Nigerians were using mobile phones. And a good proportion at that time too, something in the neighborhood of 31 million of those mobile phones were smartphones. Then, of course, the global internet usage audit was suggesting that 46 million Nigerians were always on the internet for as much as anything close to 12 minutes. So that told us something important, that there's already a transition, although this transition started way back with the digital migration on a global scale, but that it has become a reality, and a reality that not only professions, but institutions and processes must ignore at their own peril. So for us, we then had to ask the question, how does this relate to the media? And those kinds of questions was, one, the media that will try to reach out effectively and solve the crisis of access, which had bedeviled Nigerian media up to that point, will have to be in the nature of online. And secondly, it also said that some of the revenue challenges facing Nigerian media will have to be solved in this way. So a lot of this was what came together for us, and we also thought that the media in the country, given the proportion of challenges and responsibilities offered it by the Constitution, really needed to renew itself. And the mechanism that it will need to renew itself, in our own view, will have to be investigative reporting. So the question then is, we had to sit down and work out how all these processes cohere and flows into something concrete. So one, we had to do something which will be cost cutting effectively, which will be revenue driving, which will exponentially solve the problem of access, which will attempt to challenge the ethical failures in the media, and above all, which will hold power accountable in greater proportion. And everything came to the point that We had to do an online media. So that's how we started on that track. And when we started, I believe we were around 390 something on the internet scale in Nigeria. But you asked the question about 3 years down the line. Forgive me if I've gone so far, But today, I believe we are something in the neighborhood of 50 on that scale, where we have huge page views, and we're probably in the country the 4th widest and largest read news organ. So that makes us in country the fastest growing media, as it were. So that looks like a good report. Well, the truth about holding power accountable is that everybody is always at risk anyway, and we think that the only defense we can have is to try to be as ethical and professional as possible. And we leave the rest, hoping that we'll be able to grow a community that will support the paper, and then hope that we know that the judicial environment in Nigeria is broken as it is today. Criminal justice system is total failure. But, hopefully that we'll continue to use those kinds of windows. But this is not to say that we don't get threats almost on a constant basis. One of the paradoxes of the media and freedom environment in the country is that, unlike military rule, they don't come knocking at your door trying to pick you away today, but they also use access restraining mechanisms. For instance, on a weekly basis now, we get at least 60 cyber attacks on our sites. At times, they've been able to shut us down for quite a few minutes, but we also have to keep responding to that, because the only mode of operation for us is the internet. So we also need to invest both in terms of technology and in terms of advocacy as a media, as an internet freedom platform. Well, that's a very good question that you raise. Revenue, it's life blood, is the DNA of any business. And you will understand part of the dilemma of the Nigerian media is that for a very long time we tended to see the media more in terms of its social functions rather than its economic functions. But the media is also a business. It has to employ people. They have to be paid. They have their own aspiration. They have to, people really, you work and then you deserve a reward for your work. And then you want to also grow in that kind of institution. So that's the part of media development and management in Nigeria that's been ignored for a very long time. Even when, so to say, business people had come into media, both ownership and management, they had come merely for the opportunistic reason of political use, and then use that to negotiate power and privilege within the system. So that's the challenge. So, but look at it also this way. Journalism needs to reinvent itself. For quite a while, we used to think in the context of print, for instance, that advertising and circulation were the only modes of revenue that the media could sustain itself by. But problem, of course, in Nigeria is that circulation is collapsing. I cannot, and nobody, even though people are busy forging the figures, nobody can say truthfully that any Nigerian newspaper is circulating 100,000 copies a day. So that's a scandal. But beyond being a scandal, that you are not even the minimal challenge of fulfilling access as a way of reaching audience, you're not fulfilling that. But that can't even support any modicum of decent business in terms of profitability and all that. Now, advertising too, it's not growing. It's not only that advertising is not growing. In my view, the whole corridor of advertising itself, it's a little bit murky, so to say. So, advertising is not really there as in a growth path, and then circulation is not. So, foundations for revenue traditionally has also collapsed. Now, back to your question, which is the best question I think we must be asking ourselves in terms of Nigeria. Actually, it's an African media problem. Is then how do you grow revenue so that, because if you don't have economically strong media, they cannot even fulfill those roles that we expect them to fulfill as a social. You can't defend human freedom. They cannot defend, because, you're always hoping that the bad guys will provide the funds, and then you can't be abusing them and expect them to fund you on the one hand. And if they fund your staff, then your staff will then become beholden to them. So, which raises the whole question of corruption in the newsroom and all that. So what we have done is then to devise what I call expanding and exploiting the complexity of the value chain of the news process. Because if you're doing journalism, your main product is news. But what are you selling? News can then be transformed into multiple forms. We do investigation. That means that we can escalate a lot of our products to a broadcast level. We can repackage those investigations as briefings. We can sell, in fact, those investigations themselves to people who want them. These are just part of the ways that we have been able to just beat the system. And believe me, what we've done in 3 years is try to grow a very credible brand, but also to grow significant eyeballs. It is only now that advertising is working in itself. I think it's a general problem of the African newsroom, and it's also related to the point I made earlier, which is that the media is poorly funded, poorly managed, and even where it had existed, the understanding is that it's merely to, for most reporters, is that they are here to serve a social purpose. For proprietors, that the media is there to help them serve their own deal on how to negotiate spaces within the economic and political corridors of power. So, in both ways, nobody is thinking about how to grow it as a revenue institution. And if you look at the composition of news managers in the country, only few come from the background of true enlightened business and entrepreneurial knowledge. So, and then you can't frog jump into, as they used to say, there's no royal road to geometry. So you can't just say, because I'm a king, I will understand even geometry or anything. So you really have to learn it. That's an issue which has then led to a lot of pay cuts, unpaid salaries, retrenchments, starving of even things like news operations in the newsroom. So, given this kind of difficulty, reporters have had to resort to what you might call self-help, a very poor way to give corruption a neat name. So so a lot of this problem really is with proprietors and newsroom managers who are unable to respond to it's a crisis, and I call it a crisis of an existential proportion. because it's quite capable of killing the whole media. Today, a lot of what we call media is, we'll just give it a glorified name, because, when you call something a profession, the profession is defined more in terms of its ethical framework rather than from, the nature of training. It's not the kind of training you have that makes you a professional. A man may train to be a soldier and then knows how to carry a gun, how to defend a cause, probably a country, and so on. But Boko Haram is carrying guns. they are defending a cause. They now have territories. That doesn't make them soldiers. So, you probably can do a lot of things like teaching and other things, but that doesn't make you a professional teacher. People misunderstand that fact. A lot of people can probably, a lot of lawyers are running around as quacks, so that's, so professionalism really is defined ultimately by the ethics of that so-called profession. So I would say that I love what's happening in our newsroom is that we really don't have journalists in the true sense of an ethical professional core of people who set out to respond to what Section 22 of the Nigerian Constitution has defined as their role as an institution to hold power accountable. And therefore, they are probably worse than what you might call hacks or, people who are, but it's probably not always there's a problem of character here without doubt, but it's probably not the fault of the poor reporter. It's a really problem of proprietors in Nigeria. Well, the very first thing is that we have to renew the profession in two ways. One, build economically strong newsrooms that can serve both social and the purpose of the media as a business, meaning that you can pay the journalists reasonable pay, provide them with health insurance, all the basic things that we seek employment for, guarantee those employments with, pensions and things like that. That's the first thing. Without economically strong newsrooms, there can never be good journalism. There's no doubt about that. The second, that the practice itself, it's central to the practice that you now have to renew it because the country is so much in deep crisis. And to my mind, the only way to renew this at this point is to give a new significance and privilege to investigative reporting. This is how you can reconnect with readers or your audience, and then certainly also build a new revenue path. And probably lastly is that, we have to improve professionalism across the board, from good reporting through good writing. If you like, you can simplify all that through great and good coverage. And then being very transparent and accountable to the readers and the community that we serve. Those are the three critical ways to kind of improve this emergency situation. I think 2015 introduces very interesting challenges for the political actors, and of course also for the Nigerian people. One is that this is an interesting election, which is, if you like, the third back-to-back civilian conducted elections. So, in a sense, it can improve the march towards democratic consolidation, really building a true culture of democracy, or it can then spiral out of orbit and become a total chaos. So that contradiction is on the one hand. The second thing that makes 2015 also significant, that is now coming in the context of a terrible revenue collapse for the administration. And typically, when you have this kind of situation, budgets will fail. People's expectation in terms of the provisions of services and the obligations of government will also fail. Afraid that this can lead to very intense passions. The government tends to become draconian and very high-handed. So that's also on the horizon. So just to put all those things. The third interesting thing about 2015 is that also for the first time we have a significant possibility of a true opposition. I don't think, although there had been efforts at opposition, but this is the very first time that you really have a national, what's looking like a national opposition that has significant spread and character. Having said all those, you're also saying something about incumbency. Also significant about 2015 is the fact that we've had about 16 years of a PDP administration, which by all accounts is a total disaster. It had not grown the country in any serious direction. And corruption, which is one of the biggest cancer against development in that country, is gone totally out of joint. So these are the things that come together, and if from what we saw, you could call them test case or rehearsals towards 2015, both in Ekiti and in Osun, you got to be very anxious about what is going on. Now, not to forget the most important factor, that this is also one election that is going to happen in the context of a massive internal civil war of sorts, the insurgency in the northeast, the low-intensity insurgency still in the south-south, and indeed an ongoing, quietly low-intensity civil war in the middle sections of Nigeria, especially between pastoralists and, the farming communities. And this runs through the axis of the country. It's underreported, except when it flares up. You hear people saying Fulani and farmers are killing each other somewhere. So this had built up a lot of communal conflicts, communal and religious conflicts through most of the states of the country. All these things are coming together in the context of the 2015 election. And Nigeria, we are not terribly gifted, in managing at the level of the state situations like this. And you got to worry that how are we going to pull this off, because you have an incumbent administration that really wants to win and wants to deploy money, religious politics, and security violence at a level that is really, and we've already started seeing those cases. We had the Inspector General of Police has the temerity to say he doesn't recognize the office of the Speaker, and then, so to say, invades the Parliament and then lies blatantly in Parliament that a tear gas merely exploded, But there are reporters there who saw everything happen, how they were shooting at, and then you have legislators scaling walls and all that. This does not speak too well, in my view. The Nigerian state is then going to find that it's both its credibility and its capacity to cohere is going through a tension like never before, It's not a very gifted state in managing those kinds of contradictions. And if the election, for instance, ends, as I believe it might end, in a rerun, I was shocked to see that the ruling government can come back to power. Now, will it then yield to that? Will it, for instance, allow elections to hold in the states who are currently suffering insurgency? All these things, I think the Nigerian state is going to face the greatest challenge. In fact, perhaps far more than the kind of challenge it faced during the Nigerian Civil War, where it failed to manage it. We will all be hoping. The most optimistic Nigerians have said that, but this is a state that also responded with very dramatic and interesting outcome to the Ebola crisis. So we have all to have that to be hopeful about, therefore.
Thank you very, very much.
It's a great pleasure, sir. Thank you, sir.